Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to the Seminary Co-op. My name is Alta Lynn Price. I'm a translator, but more importantly, I'm an avid reader. And it's my great pleasure to be bringing the Sant Jordi Festival to Chicago for the first time ever. We had our inaugural event last night at Haymarket Books, so it's wonderful to be in Hyde Park today. And I would like to introduce my colleague Marianne Newman, who's going to give you a little background on the festival itself. Marianne translates from Catalan, and she, I'll let you say your books because I'll choose your favorites. Share with the audience. And yeah.
Thank you for coming out on a beautiful Saturday. The Sant Jordi Festival of Books and Roses is a Catalan tradition. It started in Barcelona. St. George is the patron saint of Catalonia, and I'm delighted that in Chicago there's a St. George's Cathedral, which is in the illustration and in our little, I should have brought a card up. So I think this is under the invocation of St. George here as well. It's the city sky.
It's on the website.
Anyway, St. George was the patron saint of Catalonia. It was the Festival of Roses since medieval times. And in the 1920s, the Catalan Booksellers Association decided, the Barcelona Booksellers Association first, decided to put books into the mix. The idea originally was that a gentleman would give his lady a rose in commemoration of Sant Jordi. When St. George slayed the dragon, the blood fell from its wings to the ground and a rose bush sprang up. This is the legend behind it. But now, when the booksellers added books into the mix, the gentleman was supposed to give the lady a rose, and the lady would give the gentleman a book. Of course, now there's no gender involved. Everybody gives everyone books and roses, and the promenades of Barcelona fill up with book stands and flower stalls, and it's just an extraordinary festival. And also a lucrative one. It's the day on which 10% of the books sold in a year are sold in Catalonia. So in 2014, we started doing Sant Jordi in New York and decided to devote it to literature and translation, to extend the umbrella or the tent of Sant Jordi beyond Catalan literature to the literatures of the world. And this way, fortunately, a lot of people have taken up Sant Jordi as their own festival, including Alta, who has brought it to Chicago. So now, Sant Jordi is no longer Sant Jordi NYC, it's Sant Jordi USA. And we're delighted to introduce you to it. Do not leave without getting a rose. That's part of it. And also, the last thing is, April 23rd is the actual feast day of Sant Jordi. But thanks to Chicago DCASE, the Department of Culture, we were given a grant and we decided to do a half-year Sant Jordi. So that's why it's happening on September 23rd, but next year look for us on April 23rd. And we're also grateful to the delegation of Catalonia in the United States who have been supporting the festival since 2014, and to the Football Club Barcelona Football Club, who also support it, and now to DCASE. So thank you, Alta, and
let's see, are the mics on? Are we testing? Okay, I wasn't sure. It's hard to tell if can you all hear us okay? Great.
This mask, by the way, is
Sant Jordi.
Sant Jordi.
Hashtag books and roses, is that what it is? Yeah, so, and to contextualize, so apropos, this migration of this concept of sharing literature and languages, I'm just very, very thrilled to have our presenters today. And to give you sort of my personal background, why I felt strongly about bringing Sant Jordi to Chicago, is that in 2020, I was involved in a German language festival. They got canceled last minute, and Marianne managed to pivot very quickly to doing all virtual. So that is how I was living in Chicago already at the time. We knew each other from New York. And your festival went online, and it went far beyond just Catalan into English or Spanish language literatures, and you really welcomed the entire world. So you welcomed Festival Neue Literatur as sort of a refugee festival into Sant Jordi. And now it's just really such a gift, I think. I do want to nod to the history of the Seminary co-op bookstores, and if any of you don't know, Director Jeff Deutsch wrote this beautiful book in praise of good bookstores, and the value of the beautiful stacks that are behind us, and the value of really, I have come here several times and found that one copy of that book that I've been looking for and couldn't find anywhere else, and they had it here, and I connected with other readers. So it means a lot to me and to us that you all showed up today. So, but some of you might be wondering, what does any of this have to do with poetry? Or, I do want to make sure I cover and welcome you to the event, Infiltrating Language itself. I took the title of this event from some of the texts that Lucina included in her book, in her translation of Vision of the Children of Evil. Infiltrating Language itself, memory, justice, and poetry and translation. So we're really looking today at how can poetic translation inform our notions of remembrance, justice, and public space. Come here, 3 multilingual experts discuss translation as part of the process of memory and justice in post-dictatorship Argentina and Chile, as well as peak-capitalism contemporary Chicago. We'll hear readings from Daniel Borzutzky's translation of Galo Ghigliotto's Valdivia, and that's from, actually 2 of the books today are from Co-Impress, which is a publisher located in Normal, Illinois, so we're keeping it hyper-local today. Lucina Schell's translation of Miguel Angel Bustos Vision of the Children of Evil, also from Co-Impress, and Jose-Luis Moctezuma's collection Place Discipline, which is from Omnidawn. And I understand that all of our presenters today have books either forthcoming or new translations on the way, so I think we'll not only address those books, but some of your newer work as well. By way of introduction, Lucina Schell is the International Rights Manager at the University of Chicago Press and a member of the Third Coast Translators Collective. Published translations include Diana Henderson's So That Something Remains Lit from Cardboard House Press, and Vision of the Children of Evil by Miguel Angel Bustos from Co-Impress. Daniel Borzutzky is the author of Lake Michigan, finalist for the 2019 Griffin International Poetry Prize, and The Performance of Becoming Human, which received the 2016 National Book Award. His many translations include Galo Ghigliotto's Valdivia, which received the 2017 National Translation Award, and I might be Italianizing the author's name. And Raúl, Zurita's The Country of Planks. Daniel teaches in the English and Latin American and Latino Studies departments at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And last but not least, our moderator and local poet, Jose-Luis Moctezuma, is a Chicano poet from Southern California. He's the author of 2 books of poetry, Place Discipline from Omnidawn, 2018, and Black Box Syndrome, forthcoming from Omnidawn. His poetry and criticism have appeared or are forthcoming in Postmodern Culture, Fence, Jacket 2, Chicago Review, Modernism/Modernity, and elsewhere. He lives and teaches in Chicago. Before I forget, I'll try and say this again at the end, but you might have seen all of these books that I just mentioned and a few more, including a wonderful anthology, are available for sale here. But first, enjoy these readings, and let's have a round of applause for our presenters today.
Thank you so much, Alta. Well, it's an honor here to be with Lucina and Daniel. And I guess I'm going to kick us off with some readings from Place Discipline, and then I guess since you mentioned Black Box Syndrome, I'll read 5 short pieces from that next book coming in 2023. So the first poem that I'll read is called Theta is the First Stream. Theta as in the Greek numeral for 8, but also for, I guess, an abbreviated understanding of death, right? Theta as signifying death in Greek, Thanatos. So there's a play here on 8 and death, of course. But there's also a tertiary resonance here in that I am harping on the Roland TR-808 drum machine, which is kind of at the origin of hip hop, right, in the 80s. So I mentioned the 808 as in the drum machine itself. Apparently, if you check out the scholarly source urbandictionary.com, it could also mean that disrupting the peace in some form, though I think that's been not exactly the accurate way of understanding it, but it's about making noise, in other words. Death is full of noise. Theta is the first dream. Theta is the first dream in the ear of night. Theta travels on the 808, the metabolic break, the rift in your heart, and resounds in the emptied love songs of the Red Star's refrain. The world annihilates its spectrums. It submerges what intelligence we have of color and communal form. Theta is the 8th letter in our entropic. Theta is the first letter in Thanatos. And yet we resist the daedal unbecoming. We resist the lettering of our skins. In Birmingham, public excess shall be required. In Chicago, public excess shall be required. Class vectors do not mark our bodies. An invisible union besets us in sets theory, the project of enumerating our schemata at the margins of race. No, we are sunken as stone lizards in Ra's gaze. The sun dazes our politic in a mire of twittery dialect. What is mimetic caption and slow violence of glacial melt at daybreak's cataclysm? The mages of harmonic systems trump our urgency, wash out our difference in the mainstream bathwater, normalize what has always been a fracture in the surface level of engagement. And yet we resist the equations of sameness. We surge on the 808. We seek 8 diagrams for the 5th assessment. We call out the entities of marginalia, voices unsurrendering of census bureaus, unseen voices in the desert, white bears in striations of apocalypse. Flood them with your faces. Flood them with the wake of your velocity. Flood them in Holman Square where the black cube glistens. Deform it. Untrammel its aesthetics of silence. Make no butchery of your conscience. Send out waves of you. Send out waves of peregrine voices at the porcine tower, heralded only by night falcons who signal your ascension, your centrifuge.
Yeah.
I was imagining that. I actually thought it was streaming, that's why it was not. That was in particular for that. It's also for here. All right, so this is, I'm just going to read the first 5 sections to the new book called Black Box Syndrome. Zero. Inside the mind, a box. And inside the box, a word. And inside the word, several letters. And inside the letters, sounds. And inside the sounds, a bird call. And inside the call, a shadow. And inside the shadow, a voice. And inside the voice, a name. And inside the name, a trace. And inside the trace, a grass blade. And inside the blade, a color. And inside red, there is blood. And inside blood, there is a stream. And inside river, there are murmurs. And inside the echo, a hand. And in the palm, another hand. And it pulls you downward. And beneath the downward, there is breath. There are choruses. There are 4 walls. There are acoustics. There are waves and geometries. There are figures on the wall and lanterns outside. There is a wind at the door. Then the eye opens and there is a chasm. and inside the chasm there's a mirror, and in the mirror there are murmurations, and inside murmuration there are starlings, and in the starling there's mind, and inside the mind the body again, and then the organs, and then the box. 1. A flux of changes to the time frame disjoints the specter on its flight plan. But I am here, inside your lung, attuned to frequencies of wind pattern. It startles me how the evening bleeds the day of blood on a quiet street. A tongue of indifference strokes the inertia that settles in each behavior. Solid as pungent smoke or humid arbor, it smells my edge of shadow. An ambuscade deforms my shapeliness, and I leap into the milpa to hide. 2. The difference between hoarfrost and frost is romantic vapor. We balanced the checkbooks and squared the rigidity of circles. The difference between werewolves and wolves is in recession. For example, if you move this way, the polyp appears to shed metal. The cards told them to cease, yet they dared to dream of a box from where the foxgloves rise like moons in trypophobic lavender. 3. The heirloom weaves its theory. They can't sculpt the clay in wind. Did you ever remark how the objects in the world disappear in the cracks? A black box sutures them, a zipper that tenderly seals the lip. Other things need explanation, like the anatomy of a derivative. Magic is in the can opener, and yet we do not see its violence. Our theory of things is that we are submerged in radio wave, and we sing. 4. We sing our punishments into being, and there are always 7 behind us. A machine to influence minds exists as a fig in the mind. That's the trick, how the breath enjams the factitious airs into expression. And suddenly, the feels peel away into affects we can touch and dismantle and replace with a stalactite force of absence. There is no world here, only the emptiness of 383 characters. And this is my last piece. 5. I'm waiting in the distant country. She is waiting in a letter. The child is waiting to receive the letter, but a grammar of cages prevents its syntax to formulate an understanding beyond what the body needs in a privation of technologies of self. Clean water, soap, walls, waiting for distant relations to arrive, and paper, and a system for paper. The world is too much with us, too much because it consists in enclosure. Thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Daniel.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Alta and Marianne, Jose-Luis, Lucina, everybody who's here, everybody in internet land. And so I'm going to read from a few different projects. Maybe I'll start with a piece of my own, and then move on to a couple translation things, and then maybe read some of my own work as well. This is brand new. Probably shouldn't read it, but whatever.
Go for it. Go for it.
It hasn't been said out loud, so I don't know what will happen in my body. Hopefully, it will not, start to reject it too badly. This is called Testimony 0912 There is a path called there is a path called over-identification with humanity, and on the path there is a line, and in the line there is a body within a body within a body that detains all the other bodies. It prevents movement from one field of light to another. I remember sap and syrup, but they're gone now. I remember acorns and nettles, but they're gone now. Come closer, I say to the depleted body. I need to listen to the cavity of your mouth, the cavity of your breath, the cavity of your drool, the cavity of your knuckles. The body spits, and in the spit there are words that must be translated from spit language to language. The translator, all she can think of is capturing the spirit of the spit, the spirit of the piss, the spirit of the vomit, the things we value most in our writing. They say we can distinguish between good death and bad death by how the leaves smell. They say we can see the quality of the dying in the aromatics of the deceased beings. They say we can see the quality of the dying in the aromatics of the deceased beings trapped in a colony of action words. So many mass graves, says the poet, and not enough time to write them. Mother and child pose in front of the mass grave as the tour guide shows them how they can best capture the experience, what angles to use so the light will shine on the mass grave just so. The tour guide plays with the snakes. And says, now we must go to the library where amid the bookshelves the death of the firstborn is ceremonially followed by the death of the secondborn, the death of the thirdborn, and so on. This, he says, is culture. But it might be a dream in which I am translating one of my most mundane poems into a best-selling novel called The Breathers, or The Politics of Breath, or The Man Who Could Not Breathe. It's a novel about the decadence of modernity. It wonders what would have happened if modernity had been a green bird instead of a nuclear bomb, if modernity had been the islands and not the continent, if modernity were the opposite of debt and death. You see, I'm not particularly good with words. I don't have a big vocabulary, and I'd rather not speak of other bodies, but my writing mouth dream mind is filled with them. In my mouth there is man number one, who is gunned down every night by man number two, who shoots man number one in self-defense because he can hear man number one's thoughts swirling around in the great thought hole of the universe. And he can hear man number one thinking, I would really like to shoot you, just so. I would love to shoot you just so. Death, it turns out, is not about momentumlessness. It's about how to transport your thoughts from one thought portal to another. It's like that classic song, I try to forget things all the time. In the translation, the song is called I Am Tripping Over My Own Lips to Get to My Face. Scan the QR code and you'll hear the tune and see domesticated booty thrusts and choreographed slip and slides across the black box of wet and wild rhythms. Time is a signal, says my therapist lover, but what kind of signal is it? What kind of fungus is it? What kind of body is it? Silence number 243.423A, or the border between your body and mine. They say the international frontier is just a gesture, but the border crossing mice know it is infinite. They know the world is a series of lines you cannot cross, a series of bodies you cannot articulate. In other words, comma, the splintered finger at the end of this poem is nothing more than a splintered finger at the end of a poem. You see it and you don't see it. What do you think about when your body is being thrown out quickly? They chisel the gold out of my teeth only to find a plastic bag, a knife, and a book infinitely emerging from the body of a slaughtered soldier. It's sort of like cliche for like translator poets to say that their translation and their poetry is intermingled, but I'm going to say it anyway and say it with like some sense of conviction. And in that piece, I sort of imagined that I was. It actually began as like trying to imagine what would happen if I tried to translate my poems into a best-selling novel, but then I sort of kept thinking about how to sort of translate lines I wrote into other lines I wrote, and that was in some ways fueling the sense of the poem. So to think about translation as not just a sort of thing that happens from one language to another, but to think of translation as like the thing that writers are always doing, both to like other writing and to themselves. So I suppose I will distinguish that with like actual translation, which I don't actually mean to do that, but I will sort of use that word anyway. Okay, so I have a translation that will be published sometime before the end of the year by a Chilean poet named Paula Ilabaca Núñez, who was born, I think, in 1979, author of several books of poetry and novels. And this was one of her first books. It's called La Perla Suelta, or The Loose Pearl. As you'll see in a little bit in what I'm reading, it's called The Loose Pearl because the sort of protagonist is split into two personalities, La Perla y La Suelta, the loose one and the pearl. And in this way sort of begins to narrate both her sexuality as well as her relationships to these various figures, the king and the eunuch, who she is sexually entangled with. Before I get into that, I'm going to read this little, the introduction that Paula wrote, in which I translated, in which she reflects on the book. She wrote this in 2007. It was one of her first books. And she says, quote, 15 years of my angry pearl. The writing of The Loose Pearl is rooted in the year 2007, when I began to share my prose poems on a blog. In these poems, I inhabited a lyric speaker, the Pearl, and I accompanied these texts with images I found on the internet. Not belonging to the generation of digital natives, the internet provided me with the space and breadth that my poetic work needed at that particular moment. The Loose Pearl was my third book of poetry, and it came to me as a painful writing, full of wounds and discomfort, an intimist and angry writing smattered with the strange things that passed through my blog. The texts were read and commented upon by people I never met, but who were there as interlocutors to my screams of heartbreak. The Loose Pearl formed for me as songs of desperation directed at patriarchy, a patriarchy that did not allow a young working-class woman to be single, without children, to sustain herself with her own money, to live in her own apartment with her own things, without a man interceding between her and the world. That's how the words came out of me, with anger, an anger that kept me suffering in agony, but the writing kept me alive. Locked up in myself and fed up, locked up in a bedroom like the Pearl, with my bed as the setting for the postures and poses of my voice. I lived and suffered in that writing. The Loose Pearl was written after a rupture, as I attempted to inhabit other bodies, as I attempted to inhabit myself once again. If the pearl lingers between the two bodies that she chooses, that of the jeweler and the king, it's because the patriarchy is like that. It manages our energies, forcing us to believe that we are destined to remain with one man. 15 years after this book was written, I look back with some indulgence at the Pearl's decisions, but at the same time, she will always be my voice, my beloved and angry voice, which dared to open up some roads, which dared to say what women in Santiago, Chile at that time were not permitted to say. So the book is structured as a series of 40-some prose poems that move back and forth between these characters. I'll just read from a few different parts of it. This is the very first page. In a basic territory, in a bed on an orange mattress, she dreams of licking white mares, looking for a place to give birth. But when she wakes up, she thinks of him, her master, an abrupt attempt to want him to stay. She thinks of him in a heap of awkward images that erupt, transformed into artifacts with neither color, nor anger, nor damage, nor penetration. That's when the voices erupt, choirs, screeching strings, operas, and rock songs. That's when her form, or the woman we were talking about, collapses in exhaustion at the foot of the bed, or maybe she's on her knees in the bathroom, murmuring a single phrase, a single sentence. It's been a month since I've fucked anyone. And then through the noise you can hear the words of a song. This bed has seen it all, from the first time to the last. And she keeps losing weight, and she keeps losing weight, saying, reciting, saying, even if I eat everything, even if I eat it. The mares graze, traipse happily. The mares in the orange bed, which is the basic territory. The rictus of her mouth when she feeds, which is another basic territory, or the shame, the damage, the fear, which are not basic. They are not. It's just like this. They take me by the neck and examine my pair. They inspect what they already know, the loose one's face, the taste of she who has already returned. Today I will eat again. The master already knows. A new fuck starts today and later on until there is no more stupid shit to remember. I see myself screwing in the bathroom, screwing in the bedroom, and in the screw I'd like to have on the sofa. This house is filled with apathy. This house in the shadow of a member that stirs it all up. This house, its clean corners, the drone of that famous song from Twin Peaks. Intoxicated from the poison left by his neglect and apathy, intoxicated from my master, my lord who moves without me, who looks for action in other neighborhoods, other bodies, other latitudes, other roadsides, intoxicated because this is the last drop that drips on my apron, on my caricature, on my twin indiscretion, on the sound of the color white, on the itch that causes a spot on my eye or a rash on my coccyx, the scabies that recently appeared on my writing hand, the fuzz on a leg turned white, all for a gold heart with a missing half. And the pearl had thought that she would never again cry for him, for the master, for the eunuch. There was no way to singularize it, the loose one says, wiping a teary eye. The wound takes many forms, names, and twisted, languid memories. The loose one haunts herself all day, exactly all day long, and at night she gets worse, and the pearl acts like it's nothing, but she can't take it anymore. Meanwhile, the loose one takes great pains to please everyone, but it's not enough. They always suffocate her, straightening her corset. She repeats herself from them. I'm not that one. Why can't they understand? And I'll just read a few more from here. This is the gold chain, and this is my heart. There's nothing else left in these cravings. You won't find anything less. The loose one would say while she was feeding the mares, giving them milk, manipulating the honey, stretch marked, hysterical, filled with extracted rings from the last digestions, from the last heaves she had been storing up in there. This is my chain, she would repeat, as if in a prayer. This is my chain, and this is my heart. Settled in the threshold that leads her to herself, settled in the tides that raise her honey and juice until she ends up on all fours, screeching as much as the mares who raise their sleepless songs, who are difficult, who take on roles, instructions, actions. This pearl knows what she wants. She knows it, and she distracts the loose one who has not stopped whining, planted in one of the burning ones, in one of the corners of her ancient, pointless, tiresome moans. I'm sick of you, the pearl tells her, she who was conceived on one of those nights in one of these starving, sickly, sweet emptinesses when the loose one fucked around the city. The loose one needed to be penetrated. She had to be. They had to put it in her so that in one of those cloying lays the pearl could be formed, so she would grow round, so she would make herself into herself, just like that. Like one of those things that happen sometimes, like that jeweler who could do it with the loose one, the same one that made her sobbing suddenly stop, who lodged himself inside her until, in a slathering of moans and spasms, they gave birth to her. Who else could it be but the pearl? And I'll just read a couple pieces from Valdivia, which was a book that was actually published in Chile around the same time, I think maybe in 2007 as well, and I translated it in 2017. It's also like a book-length poem, and sort of chronicles the young narrator and his mother's escape from Valdivia, a town in southern Chile, famous for its many rains, as the book puts it, and famous for its sort of mystical monstrousness. And they're sort of charting this narrative of leaving this kind of abusive father. I'll just read a few pieces from this and then hand it over to Lucina. On the Pedro de Valdivia bridge, two cars collide. We went flying through the windshield, my mother and I falling 40 meters into the Calle River that runs slowly beneath us. Over us, suddenly, and two men are still up on the bridge, stretching their arms with their fists clenched. I die, she dies. When their horns collide, I die, she dies. how easily the demons infiltrate the day. A house is blazing in the city of Valdivia. Inside of it, a woman is burning. The firefighters can see her, and though they have the nozzles in their hands, they are stupefied, because in the flames, they can see this woman transforming into a white silhouette who sings and dances, and it looks like the flame is just the orchestra, because her eyes have gone. She dances in flames behind the window. White tongues and dragons of fire encircle the house, dragons who appear to stare in fascination at the firefighters, who study how the tongues of fire try to touch the moon, who radiates spookiness and silence. The night is blacker than ever. The fire burns, and its crackle is the music of a woman who dances to the beat of the fables, to the beat of a circus of gypsies that appears and disappears with the rain. The woman who dances is a witch, they say. She goes out some nights, transformed into a bird with her actual face. A bird of fire. I wonder if it nests in this burning house that the firefighters are looking at, entranced as they do nothing, not understanding that the white stain with arms and legs moving through the house in the flame is flesh and bone, and she doesn't die because she has a pact with the witches who are also birds and who threw stones over the houses of those who are going to die, because death is Valdivia's daily bread. The dead don't want to leave this place, and they'd rather stay white, like the woman rustling in the flames and who can be seen through the windows, crossing the living room in flames. Outside, the firefighters don't know what to do, and they haven't even sprayed a drop of water. When the house suddenly goes dark and the flames disappear as if they had never even been there, without leaving even a trace of the fire, without leaving even an ash, even on the closed-up curtains. The firefighters, stunned with the dry nozzles in their hands, they don't understand where their dragons went. The tongues of fire that licked the night, but there's not even a trace. The fire is out. There's not even a mark in the unscathed house. Just a white-haired woman barely leaning out. She moves slowly. She moves slowly, slow movements, drawing the curtain, with white eyes watching, leaning out of the window. And I'll just conclude with one paragraph that Galo writes in the in his little introduction to the book. He says, my own mythologies live inside my memory. The constant rustling of the trees outside my house and the pounding of the rain and the wind would loosen my imagination. When I began to write Valdivia, everything was all mixed together, and so I created a portrait of those mixed up memories, which included elements of reality, of my imagination, and of mythology, all extracted from a vision seen through the eyes of a child. And for me, it was especially important that this transposition also related to the reality that the country was experiencing at the time. The military dictatorship, the persecution of thousands of Chileans, the violence, the torture. All of this occurred in an environment inhabited by ghosts, by mythological beings that came directly from the inferno, who would do evil for the sake of evil in the same way the mythological birds transformed into men. Men in real life transformed into beasts who exercised their brutality over a, quote, motherland that suffered direct terror. We know that every book is political, but I did not know this when I started and finished Valdivia. Over time, I discovered that there are things in this book that I did not know were there, but there they are. I am there, yes. Valdivia, yes. But Chile is there as well, and the emblem of Chile is violence. The country's motto is, quote, by reason or by force, and almost always it ends up being by force. It's a tragic country where legends exist because there is always something dark and evil creating them somewhere. Galo concludes, I'd like to talk much more about Chile, a topic that fascinates me. Perhaps filmmaker Raúl Ruiz was right in saying, quote, the only issue for Chileans is Chile. Or as poet Enrique Lin writes, I never left horrific Chile. I never left anything. And I'll stop there.
How does this sound? Good. Okay. Hi, thank you all for being here. Everyone who's here, everyone who's on the web. Thank you to Marianne, to Alta for bringing the festival here. Thank you to Jose-Luis and to Daniel for the beautiful work. And I'm delighted to be reading and in conversation with you both. I'm going to read from this translation that was published in 2018 of Miguel Angel Bustos. I have been working on some other things since then, but I didn't prepare to read them, so I'm not going to. I'll say a little bit about Miguel Angel Bustos to get started. Miguel Angel Bustos was born in 1932 in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He published 5 books of poetry in his lifetime. He was working primarily in the 60s. He was also a visual artist. This is his artwork on the cover of the book. He was also a literary critic, and he was also a political leftist militant, and I think in part because of that work and because of the vision that he wrote about in his literature and his poetry, he was disappeared at the beginning of the military dictatorship in Argentina in 1976. His work fell out of print after his disappearance. It was really forcibly erased from the canon, and during his lifetime, he was acclaimed. He was a pretty important poet in his generation, but his work after his disappearance was really suppressed. His son, Emiliano Bustos, who is also a poet and an artist, like his father, published his father's complete poetry in 2008, which was the first time that all of that work had been collected together and available in print in about 3 decades. To get us started, I'm going to read a fragment that is related to Sant Jordi, St. George, the festival. And I should also mention that this translation contains 2 full-length books by Miguel Angel Bustos, Fragmentos Fantásticos, Fantastical Fragments, from 1965, and Visión de los Hijos del Mal, Vision of the Children of Evil, from 1967. And I really see these books as part of the same project in conversation with one another. They follow a lot of the same structures. They have some of the same forms, poetic forms. They have recurring characters. They're also very narrative, and they're very mystical. And they both have long series of fragments, kind of aphoristic fragments. 62. St. George on television told of his duel with the dragon, but his proclaimed victory was a lie. In another part, at the same time, the dragon related his triumph. Dragons are terrifying. Better to say yes, yes, yes. I'm going to read a few more fragments. We have traded our destiny as gods for that of businessmen. When my father died, his oblivion was born. A dream interprets me. Whether it understands me, I'm not sure. Extinguish me, Lord, extinguish me, or else they'll have to call the fire department. This is my personal favorite fragment. Escribe condenado, escribe infinito. Write condemned, write infinitely. These are fragments from Vision of the Children of Evil. Collect sea grapes, make wine from heaven, get drunk on earth. The Holy Spirit to Mary. I'll make you conceive, but you'll remain a virgin, so I won't be jealous of myself. Attention, roses of future springs. I'm taking the sun. Listen, it's simple. It was thrown on me. I was dust, I am time. Hell, that rib we're missing. Houses have doors so that children can enter and the dead can leave. The corpse is a child that doesn't play. The madman is a child that plays while wounded. The child is a child that childs. Okay, this is from a section of fantastical fragments called Arrival in the Heavens. The epigraph for this section is, of how I went in search of a language and had to descend for who knows how long. There's a motif of the divine descent in these books. Oboe for metals and words. An oboe sounds, son of all the great city's trees. Bell of leaves and branches, you will make me cry, perhaps scream. Never a naked sound no more. Lost satellite that falls whistling fire. Metals and words. Listen how the new mouth of such a sound must be. Word mass of the heavens. Not the dying scale of solitary voices masturbating in the void, not a nail from the aerial cross of each man. Already the word has ceased to be lover, only to be mass. Sea, land, they are thick, they crash against the air, they are billions of stars. Tides of words, tide of every day, I will order the sea that speaks and departs for the heavens. I can cry. Oboes sound that wound, and one has a heart made of dead foam. If I had broken sounds, musical noises to last a lifetime, I would not write poems, but rather voices beneath the water sand of voices. I'm reminded that these are not poems. I write essays of worlds displacing entire peoples. Metallic speaking mass that raises strange breaths. Populations for a new heaven of masses. I wish you had seen me, my love. It was night and the seas swelled. I attempt living. Who was it that said, Lord, why have you forsaken me? A God, undoubtedly. Or a man a few minutes without mouth, his palate turned to the sun. Don't worry that it's not our hair, our fingernail, our saddest cold that says to us, Lord, why have you forsaken me? It's that we go on so human, we're all gods. Our shoe a god, our step a god, our fear a god. We will end our days as good gods, crucified. This is a poem I wanted to read in conversation with one of the poems that Daniel read from Valdivia, the one about the fire. I was hoping you would read that. Crazy Juana enters my body. This is a poem kind of about the mad queen, Juana la Loca from Spain. Crazy Juana enters my body. Immense heat burns the glass. The window arch shattered. The door had already fallen in smoke. And me, what was I doing there? Outside voices and moans, streams of water splashed in the street. Come on. The voice of the firefighter who had dangerously climbed to my window to rescue me made me come closer. Give me your hand. But then I said to him, I am crazy, Juana, say it is so. Not hearing, he pulled my hand. Knowing what I risked, I let go of the man's fist and lost myself in the smoke. I looked for my bed. Little flames followed the weaving of the bedspread. I put it to one side, lay down, closed my eyes. But from far away they shouted at me for a long, long time. You are Juana, Juana in hell. Give me your mortal body. All right, I'm switching over to the other book, Vision of the Children of Evil. Archipelago of Tremors. The sea rises, salts the sand, sets fire to the grasses with suns fallen in its waters. I want to inhabit a land that trembles like the lung of a boy, that launches fruit toward the heavens, crossed by the blood and feathers of glass birds. When I move my tongue looking for words like grapes, I drink their alcohol that invades my veins like the kiss of empty lips. Oh, my words, my daughters. Let's go to the holy archipelago of tremors, to her stones, her frozen marbles that radiate violet rivers against forests black as blood clots. Hear the moon open the mercury sky. Look at the stars, the burning verbs. How they speak gives mouth to the new tongue of millions of letters, of few letters. At their backs break columns of galaxies, inhabited crystals that wait for a new tongue to be born in gloriam. A verbal dagger cuts the air, my tongue is its daughter. Beneath the hallucinatory oil of the sea, my mouth devours thick fish, speaking cathedrals. I know your code, your hidden code, abyss of the heavens. My word womb of prophecy, we are in the verbal islands. When it's night, the night free of the future tense, detained in an embrace with a hand barely on your body, we will bear the shriek that splits the universe. Let us give our mouths blue temples crossed with clarities. On the cross, language awaits the lance that wounds its visionary side. I think I might read like two more short ones. Okay. Epistle of St. Paul to the Mayas, Incas, and Aztecs. You must wait, wander in shadows, be reborn in crude skies of jasper and rust. But in the 15th century of our era, we will fall upon you. Your temples of gold will cross the sea. All vigor will be castrated. Each sunrise will be a mortal sin. We will decimate your people. Those that are saved will be baptized. All right, I'll close with this one. Timeless prophetic womb. I am of no century. I live outside time. I am my century as I am my sex and my delirium. I am the century liberated from all dates and penumbra. But when I die, the prophet in me will rise like a child without morals or motherland, a crazy boy with shrieking tongue. Then I will rise in the millions of galaxies. Mothers of the future, careful. When I die, I can return. Till then, I womb that holds me, sweetest cathedral of darkness.
Thank you so much, Lucina, for that wonderful reading, and thank you, Daniel, as well. So I'm going to take the reins of the discourse here and attempt some questions first before we open up to all of you. I do have some questions. I was jotting down, listening to these wonderful translations and some new material as well by Daniel. I think I'll start with 3 key words that just sort of sprung to mind. One is censorship, and the different forms of censorship, which I think, interestingly, could be associated. It could be sort of unhinged from its political understanding and its political usage, and seen more as a kind of weirdly ascetic practice that perhaps, and this is my question, translators have to undertake at some level to censor the self, right, as a kind of practice of translation. Does that contradict, I suppose, or how does that work, rather, with our understanding of political censorship, particularly, especially when it comes to the sort of historical and social background behind the poets that you're translating, right? Certainly Miguel Angel Bustos and in Argentina, and of course in Chile, in which, to go back to a quote from Galo, Ghigliotto that was read by Daniel, the emblem of Chile is violence, right? And a lot of that has to do with certainly censorship, suppression. So I guess let's start off with that. Like, how can we unhinge censorship and from its usual political ramifications? Is that something that you have to tackle yourself when dealing with authorship and translation and trying to transmit, the text that you're translating? How does that play into your work?
Sure, I can start that. So the question about censoring oneself as a translator is interesting. Giving voice to someone else's words. I think in terms of Miguel Angel Bustos, his language can get very weird. It can go very weird, and that was important that I had to not normalize it in translation. That I had to go as weird as he went, where that went, and not try to overly make sense of it for myself or readers. And I think that relates to the issue of political censorship, because certainly the project of repressive governments is to suppress that kind of weirdness, that neurodivergence among a writer or an artist, and that kind of really pluralistic, diverse vision of what the society can be, what a culture is. In Argentina, Miguel Angel Bustos was very interested in the other indigenous cultures and civilizations of Latin America, and trying to kind of rescue or recuperate that culture that had been lost in Argentina. And that was very against the national mythology that was being advanced at the time that he was writing.
So I don't know, there's like 3 or 4 ways that I want to answer the question. I think like translator as like artistically, it's sort of like the first, I'm imagining there's 3 drafts, but there's like 3,000 drafts, right? But like 3 processes, right? That like the first go around, I feel like is sort of like the uncensored version. The like second one is like super censoring and trying to like figure out how to respectfully present the writer in accurate ways, and then like and also sort of like trying to like not eliminate the self, but try to like figure out where like maybe the self has gone too far or something like that. But I do feel like the first round I'm not sort of I'm just trying to get the words on the page, and if that like has a kind of freedom to it, that's fine. And then I feel like the sort of third phase of that is finding, is sort of like decensoring my own need to like censor myself, and like trying to figure out like where one can kind of expand the text, where there is room for being, I don't know, something other than literal, where there's room for kind of creative interpretation, let's say. So I don't know, that is a sort of like artistic answer, which, you know, see, I might regret later. But then the political one too is like there's lots of different dimensions to that. On the one hand, in the case of Bustos, in the case of maybe Raúl Zurita, who I translated, like they were actually writing in the midst of censorious regimes, right? And so I think that like translation then becomes and it becomes certainly a loaded act, right? It becomes an act that carries a different kind of responsibility. In certain contexts, it can carry a sense of danger. Thinking about, I don't know, let's like Salman Rushdie's Japanese translator who was killed, right? So it's important to just kind of keep that in mind, right? That for in many contexts, translation is dangerous. And when you are translating writers whose work is under threat, translators also become under threat. So that's sort of one story. I feel like, you know, the introduction I read of Paula y la Vaca, where she's sort of talking about writing within a censorious culture, and there it becomes like, but that is not like necessarily censoring her on the page, right? But I'm writing from a kind of censored point of view, and I feel like that becomes trying to somehow occupy that that understanding, at least, like where is that writing coming from? Where is it in relationship to the culture that it is speaking to? And this becomes like a frustration of translation, because it's like I feel like so much of that is like carried in the body, which of the writer, right? Which like one can never understand as the translator, but like as a writer, I feel like the writing comes from the body, and so I'm sort of like obsessed with this idea of like, if I could, like my sort of dream translation would be one where I could like occupy the body of the translator to sort of figure out like what sorts of bodily experiences they're having that lead to words. I know that sounds like absurd, but like that's what I think about, is how the body produces language, and that's for me like the place where I don't know, where interestingly that question of censorship, where that question of one's relationship to their society kind of often carries itself, and it's sort of unknowable.
All right, I have just two more questions, actually, just one specifically to the poets that you're translating each, so two different questions, and then we'll open it up. So the first question actually is, and again, a lot of this is new to me, and I appreciate being here, sort of listening, especially to Miguel Angel Bustos. I was delighted to hear translations of. So I'm very curious. So my first question is to Lucina, which is about where do you see Miguel Angel Bustos fitting? Because in terms of Latin American poetics, right? Because when I was hearing some of it, and particularly the fact that he was sort of intermedial, would actually, or transmedial, sort of like be a painter, a drawer, he would illustrate his poems, you know, thinking of that sort of Blakean dimension to it. I can't help but also notice that there's a sort of symbolistical quality to it, like a very French, right, symbolist tradition that reminds me in Latin America of people like Rubén Darío or José Lezama Lima, right? Where does Bustos fit in terms of the tradition, right? How is he received in Argentina today, right? What is the rhetoric surrounding his work? And then my other question for Daniel has a lot to do with the body, certainly. One of the major, I think, features of your work, both as translator and as a poet. Interestingly, you talk about something that reminds me of a poem that Lucina read about being possessed, right? Juana la Loca, right? To be possessed by something, to be possessed by a spirit in sort of this crypto-Catholic way with Bustos, right? But for you, Daniel, it seems to be much more physical, like extremely physical, right? Graphic, not in the sense of the pictorial, but graphic in the sense of the senses, right? Like to be completely immersed in all of the detritus of the body, right? In all of the kind of the rubbish of the body, right? Not the body as some sublime object, but the body as a series of failures, right? Or objection, or of something that is objectified, right? So I guess my question to you is, in desiring this to be possessed by the poet that you're translating, is there something like an appendage that grows on you that sort of changes the way that you write your own poetry, right? Which is another version of what you already said earlier when you started reading. Does it affect you, right? But I actually want to know if there has been moments where, in a physical sense, the way you read and the way that you inhabit the text has changed for you in a notable way, right? In a way that you can actually demarcate and be very specific about, since we're being very specific about the body, right? So I'll leave that. So I guess, Lucina, you can go first.
Okay, sorry.
You're going to repeat the question?
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of where Bustos fits into traditions, you're absolutely right, Jose-Luis, that he is very influenced by the French poet maudit. He's a poeta maldito, very, very much so. He's influenced by Rimbaud, Baudelaire, Antonin Artaud, Gerard de Nerval. Those are some of the writers. He was super culto. He was very, very, very well read in many different languages. He read in French. He studied these poets. He is also influenced by some of the German romantics, by Hölderlin, by Novalis. So very, kind of tragic romantic. This is a kind of person he was. And then in the Spanish language tradition, I mean, I would say that I think the most significant kind of influence or lineage that he comes out of would be Vallejo. I think he has a lot of lines that are very Vallejiano. And within his own generation, he was kind of related to Alejandro Pizarnik a lot of times for that kind of aspect of decadence, of exploring mental illness and things like that. And then also in the Spanish tradition, he studied the Golden Age Spanish poets. And that kind of language is something that he explores a lot, and that was really hard to translate. He writes in that kind of mystical style. Also, I like San Juan de la Cruz is another influence. And with a lot of hyperbaton, with like inverted syntax, and those kind of like meters and stuff. He was also influenced by Brazilian concrete poetry at the time, and he explores with that a little bit.
Crazy range of influences. Was he in dialogue with Berlanga?
I don't know. I can't really say.
Yeah, It's such an amazing book, so if you haven't gotten it, go get it. It is over there. Pauli Lavac, I would say, is very much influenced by Alejandra Pizarnik, who you're talking about. Okay. Transition to this very complicated question about, because it's not so much a question about translation as embodiment in terms of sort of my own, in terms of writing.
Yes.
Okay.
I want you to talk about death.
Well, I don't know. I mean, lately, I'm really frustrated with like the distance of me, poet, but like all of us, like from poetry, right? Of like I'm very frustrated that like the poem is there and I'm here and I like read the poem and then I have to like step back and be like, okay, now I'm going to rationally analyze this really weird thing that I read, and I don't know how to like, and like we all struggle with how to fuse those things, right? Because we all like carry these different people inside of us, but it is. And I don't know what the answer. Like the answer is to like roll around on the floor, or like just sing all the time, or just like be yourself as like boldly as you can. And all of those things are kind of impossible. And given context, so I just like don't like. But that's like the thing that I want is for there to be like no distance between like me and the poem, or us and the poetry, or it like to not have this like stepping back from who I am. And so I feel like the other, like, when did I or what has been the, I don't know, evolution of that? Like the evolution of that is like discovering that it's like all performance and understanding that like that to when you are asking somebody to spend time with your work, you are asking them to spend time with your performance of your work, and to like the ideal is for them to feel it in the body, right? Is to like try to communicate it in that kind of level. So I don't know. I mean, those are the sort of things that I'm thinking a lot about, and really like don't know how to reconcile so much, but that's like the dream / frustration, is sort of wanting it to wanting there to be a kind of unity between myself and the work in this way, and it's not like I don't know. So I'll stop talking there, but I'm just like the sort of thing that's like asked of artists who want to, and it's like respectful. It's about like having conversations, right, and making your work public. But like the like thing about like having to talk about your work in a different way than the work is striking me as being really complicated, right? Like I wish I could sort of answer like the questions in a poem, and not do it in a kind of like rational speech, which somehow feels to me like it's in conflict with the poem. I don't know. And it's been like a long few years of pandemic being inside, and I don't know. I feel like that has been one of the effects of it, is like making myself so aware of how I live within my body and how language lives within my body.
I guess we could open it up.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yeah. Any audience questions? You can come up to the mic. Don't be shy. We're all flabbergasted. I'm gonna ask a question, and I feel like it's a little loaded. I guess I noticed that both of you have translated. It seems so obvious, and I almost don't want to talk about it, but I have to ask. You both translated writers who inhabit highly different bodies from your own, specifically gendered. And I don't know if you want to talk about that experience. I feel like that is one thing that in translation discourse in the United States, there are questions of like, well, who has a right, who is qualified to translate what? And I feel as though, I am not a poet and I don't translate poetry, although I did connect with Lucina many years ago with a fun attempt at translating poetry. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that. Like, is it just, does it affect your work, or do you think about it? Does it not come up at all as you work? Yeah.
Yes. All the time. But I sort of want to like move away from, I sort of feel like the zeitgeist answer is that like is to sort of think about it in terms of appropriation, which or misrepresentation, right? And clearly one. There is that danger, and I think some people would argue that you have to share a certain kind of lived experience to translate another author. To me, that seems like there is a kind of danger of falling into a kind of silence if we go that path, right? If we don't try, that also feels like a kind of error, and one that ends up sort of feeling very censorious. So I think one is to like, as much as possible, be aware of those both bodily differences and differences in subject positions, and I think often one can counteract some of that through a kind of research and a kind of discussion with the author. In my case, I have like, I don't know, hundreds of emails back and forth with Paula where I maybe feel as if because of that difference that there's something that I need to get right in a certain way, and so I'll be like, oh, and when you said the word "and," did you mean "and"? But like where it's very sort of like both basic questions and very complex questions, but like making sure that through a kind of dialogue that it's obviously impossible to have with a dead writer, but with a living writer is possible and important, I think, if you're able to do it. But I think research in the case of a dead writer is another way of doing it. Some people like go to the place where the writer is from, et cetera, et cetera. I think there are just ways of trying to understand lived experience while recognizing that you're not quite ever going to get there. But for me, I want to say like I certainly recognize it. I recognize it as as both a problem, a challenge, a kind of danger, a kind of cultural danger at this particular moment, but also like one that, if not confronted, is also really dangerous. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Daniel about the potential danger of a kind of silencing of, I do think that the right translator should translate the right author, ideally, but what does that mean, and who is that person, and maybe that person is the person who makes an attempt, and because no one else is doing it. This is one of the first translation projects that I did, that I started working on when I was very young, and I was interested at the time in translating a male author because I thought that would be a real challenge for me as a female translator. And that now strikes me as very naive. Like, why would that be the challenge? Or why is that the greatest difference between us? I don't think it is necessarily. And I've translated female authors since then, so I don't know. I also did a lot of research. Working with an author who is deceased and who was disappeared and who was censored and silenced and really erased for a long time is a different kind of responsibility. I felt that very heavily. I communicated a lot with his son, Emiliano Bustos. He was the person I went to ask questions, like of the kind that Daniel is describing, questions of interpretation and meaning. But Emiliano really doesn't speak English or read much English, and so and he's also not his father, and he didn't have much lived experience with his father, actually, because he was 4 when his father was disappeared. So I think my understanding of Emiliano as a poet and his work has a great part of his life has been learning about his father and who he was, and trying to like kind of resuscitate who that person was through reading his work, getting to know him through reading his work. And so I felt like I followed a similar process, and really just relying on the work, and the translation is just an interpretation. I think Bustos' work is very complex, and I hope that my interpretation can provide a way into it. You know, sometimes I had to make decisions, like this could mean multiple things, I'm gonna go with this. And yeah, I hope it can be a way in for other people to figure out their own ideas of what it means.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm interested in, first of all, thank you for such wonderful work. I'm interested to hear how you go about tackling words, phrases as translators that would be nowadays, at this moment in the United States, considered politically not correct. And for writers who lived and died in these thwarting regimes, sometimes using a word that would be nowadays considered inappropriate in this country, maybe there would have been an outlet for them. Just recently, Stephen and I were translating a poem, again, Serbia, again, dictatorships and all that, and the poets very happily used the R word, which is nowadays, considered inappropriate. And so how do you go about that? How much do you sanitize? What do you do in these situations?
What's the R word?
Retarded.
No, it's a great question, especially again, like when translating older writers. It hasn't happened in a long time, and so with this sort of recent work, I don't think I've quite had the problem. But if it were to come up, like at this moment, I think I think I would try to be as honest about it as I could, and maybe both sort of translate it with whatever politically incorrect actual meaning that it has, but maybe include some sort of writing about that to explain both the choice to not cancel the writer and to and the choice to do it that way, right? Because I think the other question you're sort of running against, we're all sort of asking these questions, is what is the value? What is? Are we willing to sort of get rid of certain historical writers because they have ideas we don't like, and how do we find some sense of meaning in them? And so I think for the translator, I think that's what's the problem is going to be, is to both explain why you care about the work, maybe explain sort of your difference with the work, but also to let it breathe in a certain sense too. So it's like 3 different sets of problems that I think are, that I don't think there's like a very right answer to, but I think the maybe worst thing would be to sort of leave it alone and not do, and not like to just present it without some sort of explanation. But then it's like, how do you do that without feeling? I'm just going to pose more questions. Like, how do you do that without sort of feeling defensive about the work, right? How do you do that without like trashing the writer who you ostensibly care about? And I think those are really hard questions to manage, but really important ones as well.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a strong example of that I've worked on recently. There might be something thorny in this book, but I don't really remember it. Yeah. But I agree with Daniel. Yeah.
Do we have one last question and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah. I translated Pedro Lemebel back in the late 90s, and I don't know if I should feel chagrin in retrospect, but I loved it. And I think perhaps there's the discourse of the trans and of gender fluidity can help us kind of get beyond that to some extent. Can we embody that person's literature by translating it? But I would like to ask you to talk a little bit about, when Daniel first started reading after your reading, I was noticing a certain kind of continuity of, boxes and cavities and lists of things, and I wonder how you feel about your poetry and what relationship it has to these other traditions we're talking about, and where do you situate your work?
Sure. I guess. Oh, sorry. This is for the live stream. Thank you for that question. Well, first of all, Daniel is a big influence. I mean, he's always been a sort of example for me as an older, older poet. Sorry, Daniel.
That means you have to take care of me.
I didn't mean it that way. I meant as an experienced poet who basically was very foundational for me as a up and coming poet in the Chicago scene. And Daniel is a giant here in Chicago, not just as a translator, of course, but as a poet. And I think a lot of my reading of the time, especially of his early books and stuff, really influenced me. So perhaps it came out, that's a very Chicago book. I'm a Chicano, as I say, from Southern California, bilingual, but essentially very Spanglishy too, and Daniel's work in that sort of field of discourse about the usages of Spanglish, about the sort of the polarity between, the sort of border zone of language, right? The way it works, not just in the body, but also in thinking hemispherically, was very, very pivotal for me. And Chicago was kind of like an alien place to me, not because it just was a different vibe, right? For me, particularly in the way that it was redlined, the way the segregation of the city was much more stark, because the density here is different from the kind of broadness of Southern California. And so it was really just alarming. But that book in particular is very interested in I guess the after image of the city, the kind of detritus of the city, the city as a kind of wants to be coherent, but I was more interested in the city's incoherence, right? It was about the city singing through this kind of palimpsestic mode where a lot of different communities, a lot of different languages were sort of superimposed for me in a way that I was trying to channel through the book. So a lot of that piling on, right, which I think was I learned a lot from Daniel's work, you know, the piling of bodies, the kind of how would you say, the repetition of the body in all of its grossness, right? Which is kind of like, I think this came back to clarify. I guess what I want to ask was, I guess
Your question, man.
going back to that question, it's an infinite question. It won't end. I guess it was about the fact that is the body fundamentally irrational? Does it have to be chaotic in order to be transcribed on the page? You know, and there's a kind of, that's sort of what I was tangling with. You're against that neatness. You're against the organizational qualities of the way we're supposed to understand cities working, but the city doesn't work that way. That's not the way a city's supposed to work. It's supposed to work through its chaos, right? I'll stop there, but that was essentially, where I would situate it. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys. Thank you all so much. Just a reminder, we're in a bookstore. They generously hosted us. They sell a lot of amazing books. I believe I didn't check this with the poets, but I'm going to take this liberty of saying perhaps you will sign some of your books, original poetry and or translation. If the authors are not here to sign, the translators can sign. And I would like to let you all know that our third and final Sant Jordi Chicago event is tomorrow at 3 p.m. at, or is it 3:30? I should know this. 3, yes, okay. 3 p.m. at Exile and Bookville in the Loop, and I will be reading from one of my recent translations along with Bulgarian translator Isadora Angel. And and let's see what else. Okay, last bit of housekeeping. We do have a little book over there because, and I want to thank each and every single one of you, because DCASE, the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, helped make Sant Jordi in Chicago possible. That means every single one of you who pays Chicago taxes helped to make this possible, to hear this amazing poetry today coming from all over the world to Chicago. Please sign up, and if you feel comfortable giving me just your zip code, because we want to let them know that we reached people in Chicago or, somewhere else. So, and we'll send you info about TCTC events. And thank you. And thanks. Another round of applause for our readers.
Don't go down the rows.
Oh, yes, Rose.
Starting with you.